BRG's 2025 U.S. Healthcare and Life Sciences Transactions Outlook Report is our episode topic. My guest is David Wildebrandt, a partner and managing director at BRG. So let's get started.
Welcome to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast. BRG is a global consulting firm that helps organizations in disputes and investigations, corporate finance, and performance improvement and advisory. BRG's healthcare performance improvement practice offers multidisciplinary services to healthcare organizations. We focus on implementation with innovative, independent, and data-driven solutions. In the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, we discuss improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. For more information about BRG, please visit thinkbrg.com. Now here's your host, Nick Shimolewski.
David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into our episode topic, could you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
I'm a managing partner with BRG Healthcare. I've been with BRG for a little over 12 years. I lead operations of our performance improvement practice. My background at BRG has been building out verticals in strategy and ambulatory services, client executive for our large AMCs and multi-hospital systems, and also in our ambulatory and enterprise strategy and population health division. Prior to BRG, I had a pretty long career in a health system executive. I was with Baptist Healthcare in Northwest Florida as the president of their integrated delivery system. It led patient satisfaction for about 8 years, was the second ever Malcolm Baldrige winner in the Fortune 100 company to work for multiple years in a row. At one point, we had half the hospitals in the U.S. benchmarked us. So it was a fun part to be a part of that journey because I think we made it better for the patient. In my current practice in BRG, I often am working directly with the clients. I'm not administrative, or when I said operations, that is more of a collaborative role. So I'm out in the field every week working with our health systems.
And a little known secret too, you actually have a clinical background. What was your transition
That's
like?
right. I got a degree in occupational therapy and did both shoulder and hand sports medicine. At that time, I had some great mentors. There was a lack of folks that had a clinical background and a business background. So that's where I was guided. So I treated patients for 5 years. Best thing I ever did. Really connected me with the staff, with the families, with the patients. It gave me an understanding. I think anytime you can work directly in the industry that you have eyes on, that is a blessing. I'm not licensed anymore, so I'm not dangerous, but I still carry those years with me. And thanks for asking that. I often don't get to reflect on that part of my journey.
Thank you for sharing. Getting to today's episode topic, on March 31st, BRG released our 2025 U.S. Healthcare and Life Sciences Transaction Report, which our listeners can download on BRG's website. Now, a lot's happened since the report was written, but can you talk a little bit about why BRG decided to write the report, and then we can get into what the findings were and what's transacted since then?
I don't think anybody could be wrong, Nick. I think you could have a very positive point of view on transactions, and there are so many things to prop that up, but you could also have a very contrarian point of view on the growth, and certainly lots of happening. And I wonder in today, what is the half-life of any thought leadership or knowledge because of the amount of change? So we'll talk a lot about oppositional forces. I think for us in transaction one, it's been a big part of healthcare. If you look back to 2019, you have over $500 billion of transactions. So you started off with mergers of community systems or just typical acquisitions, and you got into bigger integrated delivery networks. And then you had multiple the super mergers coming together. Right. So it was driving industry. So that's why it changed industry. It changes supply chains. It changes labor market. It changes the payer market scale. A lot of executives were either displaced or had new employers. So it's been a very active market for a while. And then you look at the interest rate impact on 23 and 24, you're down 40-50% of what you were in 2019, plus the impact of COVID. So there has been this amazing dynamic and confluence of forces that have shaped us. So we wanted to step up because we've been in a holding period in 24 and say, hey, here's our thought on 25 and beyond. So that was the impetus for putting our insights out in March.
And what were some of those key findings?
Not a typical disclaimer, but I would say a little bit of an amnesty period here. I think, look, when we came out, if you looked at it just from an executive summary, that we were expecting to bolster transactions in 2025. Right? And we looked at, we speak mostly today about providers and hospitals, but we also looked at payers and we looked at pharmaceutical or life science, because those are very active businesses themselves. By the way, I think it's almost desensitizing, or it's fairly ubiquitous, the amount of payer mergers that are going on. And by the way, just one interesting fact, that's the largest employer of physicians now for payers. I don't think folks should sleep on the payer impact. And then pharmaceutical, life sciences, when you look at all that's happening with the advent of biologics, new drugs, technology, people buying their way into AI and buying their way into partnerships, that has been important too. So I would say, just for contextualizing the conversation, Nick, that there's a lot of different types of partnerships besides just M&A. There's also divestitures. You look at Ascension and CHS and other big systems, they have spun off hospitals as well. The idea coming into that, most of our respondents on the survey and us, more than 2/3 thought that transaction activity will increase pretty significantly over the next 12 months. That was the early finding. My joke around amnesty period, we had no idea what would happen first quarter of this year. This is not a political talk. I'm not a political person, but it's what's happening. Has DOGE have an impact? Absolutely. Today, you're sitting there watching rhetoric or information that the House and Senate are around hundreds of $billions of Medicaid cuts, folks that may lose Medicaid and be in the market. That creates a huge disruption. The tariffs and the folks who are opining, including BRG, we have multiple talks going on what the impact could be to supply chain, plus all the other upstream factors that could increase the cost of delivering healthcare. The interest rates volatility, the stock market volatility, those things, Nick, have created an extended hold period. It's always tell people, what do you do when you're driving and you drive into fog? You slow down, you grip the steering wheel, and you're looking all around you, and you're very nervous. Well, that's what it's like now. That was not contemplated. Certainly, there's been an improvement where there's still somewhat of an inflationary period. Some of the things that were in the way in 24 are still in the way. There's been a bunch of new house guests that have been introduced that potentially could work, again, oppositional to transactions. But by and far, folks have just have paused. They have pumped the brakes. They're being very selective, right? So you have that behavior going on. And first quarter of this year was lower than first quarter of last year. So if anything, I think it just delays the process of what we predicted because of these extraneous factors. However, on the other side, Nick, there is lots of money sitting there. The deals haven't went away. Hospitals aren't improving in their performance or outperforming their budget. It's the opposite. So if you're a hospital and you're on grocery store margins or possibly losing money, you're usually performing even worse now. The market hasn't helped you, and the non-operating income hasn't helped you. You still have a very compressed labor market, which I want to talk about at some point. That's a huge factor as well. And then very large physician subsidies and scarce physician resources. So all the things that make it very difficult to run a profitable healthcare system are still in play. And then you've added in these other disruptors, Medicaid cuts, tariffs, DOGE, things that could potentially make it even tougher to have margins. But the deals are there to be had. There's money to do the deals, but there's still a holding period. So folks haven't unleashed that. No. So there will be a bolus of health systems that will move through the transaction pipeline eventually. Or if they can't find a buyer or the hold period is too long, they'll need to go the restructuring or divestiture, which is a type of transaction. So either way, I think we'll find our way back to that improvement. And hopefully that makes sense, just of supply and demand principles here.
It does. Sounds like there's going to be a lot of activity as we begin to drive out of the fog. You mentioned you wanted to talk about the labor market a little bit. What's going on in the labor market right now as it relates to all this activity and market volatility that's going on and its impact on healthcare?
I wouldn't say it's a blind spot. I think it's just not appreciated in the macro. So when COVID happened, we lost a lot of people out of the workforce, or some people returned to the workforce for a brief period and went back to retirement. And then what happened is we turned to contract or agency labor, which that genie's out of the bottle, right? So if you're a nurse or an allied health professional or one of the scarce job categories in healthcare, you were paid significantly more to travel. Some people were getting contract jobs in their own market. So that reset expectations of pay. If you think about compensation, Nick, you think about yourself personally or anyone, there's an expectation that you have that you probably think, hey, that's my cap, right? We broke through the glass ceiling. It was the Wild West of, what is good comp? You're talking some people that were making $50 an hour to making $175 an hour. How do you walk that back? So a lot happened. We got mostly out of agency and contract, somewhat returned to norms, but the volumes didn't. The ED has turned into an inpatient unit. Almost an inpatient has turned into a critical care unit, and the critical care units are just overwhelmed.
Yep.
So, Nick, I say this about health systems, and it's true. Health systems I've ran or managed or consulted on, they miss budget during spring break because a few surgeons are off the grid. That's how thin we are with margins and volume sensitivities to profitable services. So imagine all of a sudden you're paying $10, $20 more an hour. We have reset the nursing salary rate. We have reset medical assistants. And what people miss is also registration clerks, access representatives, folks that work in revenue cycle. So there's been a reset of salaries. They went up. And so now that's permanently baked into the P&L, to our costs. And so we've got to offset it. So what are people doing? They turn to supplies. They turn to all kinds of other areas to offset that. And then if it doesn't work, they turn to a partner. Most of the costs are supplies and people.
What should I, as a nurse executive, be doing to best position my organization for success and work with the CFO, the COO, the CEO in this time of uncertainty?
I'm very proud of what I've seen with this cohort of leaders in the industry. I think underappreciated the amount of tenacity, resilience, and that all financial decisions come out of the CFO's office. There's lots of nursing and clinical leaders that really embrace the bottom line, understand their costs, and are doing things to bend the cost curve. The bigger thing is the level of seriousness of what we're facing, right? This is an all-in mentality. It's all leaders, especially the clinical cares. You don't have the choice to just excuse it with quality or the reasons why you can't make these tough decisions. They're all real, but that's our operating environment. You're going to either make those tough decisions or you're not going to be in business. So we're to that point. This isn't nice to have. And I think the big thing is embracing that we're going to have to discontinue some services. We're going to have to work differently. And just getting to that level of acceptance is huge. And then, so moving past that philosophically and going into how can we do things differently? And lots of folks are doing it. AI in the charts. We're in a whole new working at top of license. We have places that do virtual nursing discharges, have really changed the configuration geographically of how they take care of patients. The accountability to the hospitalist and intensivists and supporting physician staff. But I think one of the biggest things is truly embracing accurate data, demanding a single source of truth around bed turnover, around looking at staffing every 4 hours, around looking at your mix of patients and just constantly being on top of the data, using data, becoming empirical, not anecdotal, and having that blend of art and science versus maybe too much on the art side. There is a way to still provide top, reliable patient care in a cost-cutting environment. Those that embrace that will succeed. That doesn't sound very riveting or romantic, but it's our world.
Any closing thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
I would think now would be the time that you really would want to embrace partnerships, embrace innovation to make sure that you plan the plan versus just doing the same thing quicker and faster. It's not going to work. And it's not a failure to ask for help, to increase your bandwidth, to bring in subject matter expertise, to subsidize the organization. I think that's what successful organizations are doing, is really challenging themselves to do it a different way, not the same way, faster. And realizing that if you are going to a partnership, be a part of the diligence, be a part of making to see if the story, the 1 + 1 = 3 is going to happen versus digging in. It's not a failure to partner. I do think there'll be more and more transactions of different nature. Some could be to gain capabilities, some could be true P&Ls, and some could be just to improve market dominance.
We're driving through some fog at the moment, but at the other end of the fog, there's going to be a lot of transactions that occur. So I would encourage all of our listeners to check out BRG's 2025 U.S. Healthcare and Life Sciences Transaction Outlook Report. It's available on the BRG website. There will also be a link to it in this episode's description. David Wildebrand, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Nick.
You've been listening to the BRG Nurse Executive Podcast, which focuses on improving patient care by advancing nursing leadership. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and podcast guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of the guest employer, Berkeley Research Group, or their other respective employees and affiliates.